Okay, the meeting is called to order. Charter Bylaw Review Committee meeting, August 16th, 2022. Is there any public comment?
No comment.
No comment from the public. Approval of the July 12th, 2022 minutes.
Motion to approve is printed.
Second?
Moved in second to approve the minutes as printed. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It is a vote. Okay, under new business, we are scheduled to meet with the Board of Selectmen next Tuesday.
Excuse me, should I go tell them to be quiet?
Now. Don't be that way.
I'm waking up.
They have given, I got this letter from Danielle, this email from her yesterday, outlining what they're putting on the agenda. It's not really terribly illuminating, but I'm assuming that the first special town meeting warrant article charter review has to do with item B here under our agenda, which is the selectmen have decided to add an item for $75,000 to hire a consultant to help us with the 5-year review. They did mention that they hope to have this back and done in time for the Maytown meeting, and I think that is optimistic in the extreme. It took us 12 months just to review the charter with a consultant when we first wrote it. The idea that you can review the charter and the bylaws and the zoning bylaws in 6 months, less than, by the time you get the consultant on board, and I assume that has to go out for bid, so something we need to talk to them about is, a realistic view of timing. Yes?
No kidding.
Yeah.
I think it's a little extreme.
Yeah. And they talk about next steps and potentially amending the charter and general bylaws. It's rather broad. We do have a selectman here. Do you have any detail?
Fresh off the presses from today, actually. You kind of heard me talk about this going back when I was first on the committee, so it's a number of years now. We were talking about in terms of postings, but it really has to do with a lot of things. The way the thing is written right now, and the way we have to notify the public about the existence of a town meeting, whether it be special or annual, involves inextricably publication in the newspaper. Right now, as a practical matter, we're looking at like 6 weeks at a minimum to deal with the Chronicle, to get anything done, to be able to put anybody on notice. I'm not sure how you feel about it, but you may want to at least examine that in terms of how people communicate right now. And maybe at some point in time, I'm not expecting, well, where's the Cape Cod? I mean, where's the, the Oracle? Where's the Oracle? Yeah, so the papers of record are slowly evaporating. I don't know that I trust the Cape Cod Times will be here in 10 years. So there may need to be some discussion about alternative language that allows you to do the same thing, but in a more mobile way. If you understand what I'm saying? I'm not sure how that is, but it would certainly
A substitute for a newspaper?
Yeah, and I'm
Either
not sure what that language would look like or what you'd want to make the town responsible to do, but you should be cognizant of the fact that the existence of the medium that you've chosen to have language for the charter is actually imperiled at this point, and it may not even exist in another 10 years.
This is something that the selectmen are looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think it would be.
Do we know whether, and I don't know the answer to this, do we know whether it is sufficient and under the law to post it on the website to make it available?
Just happened today. No idea. Nobody's really looked into it. I'm just pitching this.
What happened?
As a liaison, we just had a discussion this afternoon because of something that we had an executive session over that was going to be included as an article, and now it comes to our attention that we may not be able to do the special on September 26th, but even moving it 1 week wouldn't help anything because of the
You
publication.
can't get it into the public, oh.
I don't know
Oh.
why, they're requiring a month. Well, like, if you reserve the pages, what difference would that make?
So this is really getting mashed into a smaller and smaller window in order to
Sure.
get...
And I
Ah.
have no answer, I'm just bringing you the problem.
So this notice from the Chronicle just happened today. So it hasn't even
We
been,
started looking at a timeline, and even moving the special town meeting a week further in the future would achieve absolutely nothing based on their time deadlines.
but the Board of Selectmen hasn't discussed this.
We don't know what time we're gonna use now because we're actually being driven by them, by the paper.
Well, who is "we"?
The Board of Selectmen and FinCom are being driven by what, even though we know when the clerk can come, even though we know when the town moderator can come, we're being driven by one thing,
But we still haven't had a
the
public,
publication.
we still haven't had a public discussion about this.
Nope, but I'm here, this is a public meeting.
No, but the Board of Selectmen still hasn't had
no date and we have no conclusion.
hasn't had a public discussion about it.
Nope.
So
But-
that might come on
But somebody
Tuesday.
actually brought up, it's printed in the charter as a requirement, so I am only bringing that up to you
Yeah.
because it is printed.
Well, and up until recent years, that was the one outlet you had.
No, I get it.
Yeah,
But they're getting more and more to the point where there's different deadlines based on what it is they're trying to print. I can get something in the Chronicle for the Board of Selectmen if I talk to Bill before noon on Tuesday for a
That's the
Thursday
deadline,
publication.
right,
I guarantee you can't do that in general. And he's talking Thursday preceding that, but this goes back even more because I think it's like 2.5 weeks they need. Lead time. And then there's the 2 weeks or whatever it is in the charter that has to be preceding the meeting. So now you're talking a month and a half, or else you can't get it in.
well, this would
Interesting.
pretty well fall at a good time as far as our discussions are concerned, because we're going to be sitting with you guys on Monday and talking about hiring a consultant for this committee to do the 5-year review.
I just heard you, and it's a totally legitimate thought, just so you understand that.
Pardon me?
I just heard them, and it's a totally legitimate thought. It is an overwhelming task because what they have to review, it's the charter and bylaw committee. What they have to review is a massive amount of things that are both the charter, it's the entire code.
Yeah. And when, the original Charter Commission, just for the benefit of anybody who's going to be watching this, the original Charter Commission, under the rules, home rule, we could choose either 12 or 18 months to get the work done and get it to the voters. We had 9 people, used subcommittees like crazy we had a consultant who did all the drafting of the language, and we met at least once a week for a year. And all we were addressing was just the charter. So the idea that you're going to earmark the money in a fall town meeting, get your consultant on board. Now it sounds like the fall town meeting is even going to be later. Get a consultant on board, if you're lucky, by the end of the year. Where is the time to do this work? To get it to a spring town meeting, it can't happen.
And look at just one part of this. Buddy was on the planning board, I was on the planning board. All these zoning bylaws are cumulative, unless they revise them and change them. You've got numbering, you've got consistency, you've got how they morphed into what they are today. I'm not even sure I'd call them a code because it was never this big confab that considered, well, let's talk about all of our zoning from zero now. That never has happened, so I don't even know what that kind of a deep dive is going to look like. Just by itself, forgetting about the regular bylaws and the regular...
And as far as the zoning is concerned, I'm not sure zoning, I've never really thought zoning should be in the purview of this committee particularly.
Yeah, but it is because of the way the code is built.
I get it. You know, and technically it is, but it's a completely other animal besides the governing documents
Well,
of
that's
the
what I'm
town.
saying. I never dove deep. I've served on the damn thing. I was the vice chair of it, and I never dove deeply into, does this fit with 1973? I have no idea. I mean, and I don't think anybody has an idea. Even the town planner probably did. When John Idman came in here, he spent the first month reading it.
Yeah, it would take about that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that gives you anything, because ultimately you'd have to have like a whiteboard saying that this did this and this implies that. And
No, it's,
that's why we figured that you'd probably want a contractor to be able to look through all this.
well, it would be very helpful because, you know, much has changed over the years, and we aren't probably even as current as we could be on just what new elements have been added that would affect what you'd want to put in a charter.
And there's still, yeah, and there's still things that you and I have discussed in the past that are implied but aren't stated in the charter. And then there's the thought that if anybody wants to get too far into a certain direction, it will require another form of government, which is a vastly different thing
Yeah.
than just modifying the charter to a certain degree.
Well, any change to the construction of the Board of Selectmen, town administrator, yeah, they're two entirely different things.
And
They're
it's a
two entirely
massive
different
undertaking.
sets of powers, and you know, we never, in the beginning, wanted to confer that kind of power on any one individual, and maybe the sentiment has changed, but I'd be surprised.
Even if it did change, that's something that I've been trying to tell them, and it may come up on Monday.
Mhm.
Is that be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
This isn't just like, okay, we'll change section 3 or section 5.
Mhm.
If it changes the overall power structure, it's a change in form of government. It actually requires the way it started. You guys can't do that.
No, it would require a charter commission, which is a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, that requires getting out on the street and gathering 15 or 20% of the signatures of the registered voters, an election to elect 9 members, an election to authorize a charter. I can tell you that even in 1986, it was crazy, and we were allowed to gather signatures in front of the post office, and a lot of places where you can't go anymore to gather signatures. So I'm not even sure how you would get it done at this point, unless you were going door to door, and you'd need an army for that. And we're talking 1,500 to 2,000
Door to door, you
signatures.
better have, you know,
A policeman with you.
detail with
No, exactly.
That's why I'm not being glib, because there's
No.
some sentiment on the Board of Selectmen that we need to fix the charter. Well, it depends on where you foray into. If you start getting into like the relative powers of the town manager versus town
Well,
administrator
there-
and stuff like that, that's a massive undertaking.
There are always things that need to be clarified, and one of the things that we talked about that I think we want to talk to the selectmen about is this whole budget timeline, which we've talked to Joe Powers about, what, 3 times now?
oh, yeah.
Because the original charter had a much easier timeline, started earlier. We were never squished up like you people have been the last few years into this little box at the end of, what, February?
Yeah, well, as your guest knows, I'm on that page.
Yeah.
I operated as you did with the old timeline, and it was a lot less stressful. Because FinCom got to make some studied decision, Carol was there on that. You got to be able to have the time to make the discussions. You had the time for the staff to make an advocacy position on a Saturday that didn't get covered in the budget, and then the Board of Selectmen could either say yeah or no, and then the FinCom could say yeah or no, and there was still 2 months left. The way it is right now, you have like 2 hours, and
Yeah.
that's it.
It's,
It's-
yeah.
And mistakes have been made because of it. I mean, just the one item that got left, Brooks Academy, got left off the warrant entirely.
And more of that's going to happen.
And more of that's going to happen because everybody's rushing and you don't have time to really,
I
do it.
liked early February. I mean, January, February was always a better idea. I don't know how it's bled into March.
well, it was changed. The whole timeline was changed, I gather, under the Ovaska committee.
Let's not go through that.
Well, I'm just saying. So I think, I mean, I personally think that the best thing to do would probably just to go back to the original timeline, because it actually worked really well for a lot of years.
I'm assuming we're dealing with adults that have good intentions. Winnie, I'm saying that because Winnie, God rest her soul,
Forget you're on tape, be careful.
yeah, I get it, but I dealt with her. Not too many people did. I'm not sure that she didn't start with the basic assumption that we were all naughty and she was going to punish us.
Mm-hmm.
And that somehow that this was punitive to everybody. And you can't start with that without a bad conclusion. I mean, you have to start with the opinion that everybody's of goodwill and really wants to do the best job possible.
Right.
But they need time to do that job. They can't. I get where the town administrator is coming from, because the state doesn't give him the cherry sheet and all that kind of stuff in a kind of timely way
But it's
to
always,
lock in revenues, but that's
it's
always
always
been
been
the case.
that way, yeah.
It's always been the case.
I mean, haven't there
If
been
you
times when we didn't even have it right up to practically
Oh
the
my
doorstep
God.
of town meeting?
Yeah.
If you're waiting for certainty in that area, then we'll forget the timeline. You might as well just go into the meeting. You can't presuppose that. You got to take a good guesstimate at it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I mean, the cherry sheets have a negligible effect, throw in 30
Or
grand.
setting the tax rate, or in a number of other things.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, no, there are a few other things, but I
Yeah, I
don't think
mean,
they have the
certifying of
same.
free cash and all of that.
One at a time.
Yeah, no, I mean, like Monomoy, it's not in its startup years, we went through all this stuff. It's not, there's like 3 items you have to guess at and then fill them in later.
And it's
Health
always been that way.
Right.
So that's not really an argument.
But the other stuff became a logjam because it got pushed out. So everything is now up for grabs.
Right.
Nothing, new positions, whether or not you need an enhancement here, or maybe, how do you do that? I mean, if it's done right under the charter, the whole idea of, you went through that too, of a town administrator or a bunch of selectmen with a yellow pad saying, well, if you take $180 out of line item 670 from the police budget and put it into, it's like, oh, for God's sakes, don't do that. The whole concept here is you have the meeting soon enough, and as a policy matter, the board says, I would like greater consideration being given to the fire department because they've made a cogent argument to be able to get some access. Go back, rework the budget, take it out of where you think it should be taken out of, and represent it with the revised numbers.
In
And that takes time.
in an article, if it's additional staff.
Yeah, if it's, I'm with you there. I don't know how we fell off that wagon, but we
Well,
have
because-
always put additional workers to the staffing plan on an article that shows who it is. And this isn't just generic, because, I mean, that's coy to say, well, we have firefighters. Well, we have executive assistants. It's not a generic thing. If you're changing the numbers of them, that was the staffing plan. And the town's public always got to say, yeah, we want a department that has, as opposed to, So he added it by an article. Hopefully, we had a selectman that actually included the overhead costs for the salary. But you added it, and it was properly placed in, and the next year, it was moved over to the budget.
Right.
And in not doing that, that's where a lot of these mistakes are starting to happen.
Well, because the language in the charter is definitely based on the understanding of that, but it doesn't entirely say that, and that's the problem, and it needs to be fixed so it says exactly that.
I don't know how you
Because-
feel, but I've had that argument too. There is voted policy, but there is past practice, which has the net effect of being policy if that's what you were following. You can't just all of a sudden turn off past practice.
Well, it
Well, I mean,
was.
isn't it called
wait,
precedent?
yeah.
That's the way it's been
You go
done.
to court, that's certainly
Court
counts as
calls it
policy.
precedent.
Yeah, but we wound up with a new position in the cultural center that
I know.
did not
I mean, I
exist at all.
objected to that. I stood up on town meeting floor and objected.
Yeah, I did too, but the
Well-
point is you need language that actually specifies that that's the deal. You want to add a body, even if it's an existing structure that affords for the name of that body. If you're increasing the overall volume and numbers of that, You gotta go with an article and say, I'm gonna do that.
Well, here's the thing. We have an article in the charter that says what it says. It just doesn't say enough. And it shouldn't be left to policy, and it shouldn't be left to past practice, because boards of selectmen change, town administrators change. They don't like the way it has been interpreted because it doesn't serve their purposes. So suddenly we get a legal opinion from wherever that says, oh, it doesn't really say that, even though it always did in everybody's mind. So it's got to be taken out of the conjecture and put on paper.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yep.
So it's in your court.
You just took longer.
Plus institutional knowledge, you know.
Well, the institutional knowledge is really important.
Right,
You know,
but
it's not that there aren't new ways of doing things that could be better, but there are also old ways of doing things that were better.
right.
And we need to figure out how to take the best of both worlds at this point.
Right.
And I
Noreen,
misspoke before, I'm not your liaison. I'm just here as a guest.
I knew that.
Um,
Do we have a liaison?
Yes, you do.
Oh.
She's working right now.
Oh, okay. Noreen?
Well, I just wanted to add on this topic, since that's what brought me here, that after looking at all of this, and, you know, I was totally on the side of, certainly I would acknowledge that was the way it was, of a separate article, an override, and on the ballot. And I did look back and get copies of everything that shows that that was not, in fact, imagination. You know, it did happen. And, but while I was thinking about that, and this is, you know, not to be resolved here, but, or not with me anyway, you know, I honestly don't know if any new position could pass a ballot in this day and age, in this contentious day and age. You know, that's what I was thinking. If it went back to the traditional old way, the last case I have is the facilities manager, the Sean Libby, and that failed the ballot and eventually was put in the budget. So we have.
It doesn't have to go on a ballot.
Why
It-
not?
Because it doesn't. The ballot,
It could be a
you
fine
have
article.
you have a budget,
Yeah,
and inside the budget is all the staff.
right,
You want to add 2 new firemen. That goes into an article.
yeah.
Now, the article doesn't have to be funded through an override.
Okay.
That's
so
a choice the selectmen make.
what were the other choices? I couldn't.
It could be funded inside available cash, you know, inside
All right.
the bucket of money we
Inside the
already
raise
have.
appropriate money. It
Yeah.
just identifies it separately so that
Okay.
you don't wind up with
However-
a massive vote on the whole thing.
However, if the cause is just, people usually will help you out with it.
Right, yeah.
If there's a lot of contention around it, not so much.
I mean, I would love it as long as there's a way to separate
Yeah.
it so that people can have a reasonable discussion. Nobody wants to rip apart an $80 million budget and, you know, start talking about one job in the middle of Article 4, you know.
The whole question of an override, and I think I shared with everybody here, if I didn't share it, I may have some extra copies, but I went back to 87
Yeah,
and followed this process through. What town meeting, what positions, you know, where, just the whole chart
I
of
had
these.
the Melville one. You did share it, yeah.
Okay. It only, when our town administrator spoke to the selectmen about it in the following meeting of the Board of Selectmen, after we talked about it here, he stated that it had always been an override situation, and he couldn't go back. Well, I'd already given him that document.
Right.
So it was there, and clearly it's not always an override situation. Matter of fact, early on, I think it was rarely an override situation. So there's a lot of
That was something I pushed.
revisionary
That one.
history going on here,
Okay.
so.
No, I'm thrilled to hear that, 'cause I'm just looking at paper and it doesn't
It
give
doesn't
me the
have,
background.
it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
It's really very easy, and town meeting is pretty good about, if somebody gets up and speaks at town meeting and there's a really, a good argument to be made for something, the voters are usually pretty generous about those things. And no, it doesn't have to go on a ballot, not at all.
That would be perfect.
Okay, better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay.
Since I just realized that I am not your liaison, I was here for the golf committee, then I'm probably gonna take my leave now because that was all I needed to tell you is that I'm
Okay.
concerned about the
Thank
publication.
you. Yes, we don't want to get you in trouble.
I'll watch you on TV.
Oh, okay. All right.
I look
We're-
taller and
We
thinner.
probably don't have a whole lot more to even talk about, because I think I think it boils down to the consultant and the timeline for a review, as far as we're concerned. I would say we probably should talk to them about this article that we just finished talking about, and the timeline of the whole budget process in general.
Okay.
So I will ask Danielle to make sure that those things are covered, either in whatever language they're choosing or something better, but I think that's kind of the long and the short of it. But I just wanted us to get together and sort of get our ducks in a row and our heads together on this, and I think we're pretty much of one mind. I do note that Ray Gottwald has resigned. He tendered his resignation to the town clerk last week, so we will have an opening on this committee.
Who resigned?
Ray Gottwald.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's having some surgery in September and just didn't feel he could give it the time that it needs, so, but he's been a good member, and we're sorry to lose him, and thank you, Ray, if you're watching.
I feel his pain.
I know you do, everywhere. So, under our, have we pretty much exhausted that one?
New business? Yeah, I think so.
Under the old business, is there anything anybody wants to talk about, or have we? I suspect a lot of this will go on hold until we figure out whether we'll have a consultant or not.
My only
because-
question about, under new business, and this whole consultant to review the charter, are we going to, the personnel bylaw, is this going to all be part of it?
I emailed Joe a couple of weeks
I
ago
saw that.
about the personnel bylaw, and he said they are still making sure that it's all jives and they've got the most current copy. As soon as that is done, he will make sure we
I mean, will
get.
that be part of the revision,
I
or
wouldn't-
or the
I
review?
wouldn't think so.
No? Well, if we're talking about zoning,
Well, I guess that's a discussion we should ask the selectmen what they have in mind. You know, they're gonna have to probably come up with some kind of a guidance for what they're seeing.
personnel
because-
bylaw is one of the biggest gray areas there is.
Okay, all right.
The thing of it is, my opinion would be if you're going to, there was some discussion about maybe putting the personnel bylaw into the code.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's in the code, and if we're being responsible for the bylaws, the charter, zoning bylaws, if that's part of the code, it should be the whole,
It should be the whole deal.
We're
whole
talking
package.
about a very large
Correct.
project that's going to take a
Very
considerable amount of time, even with a consultant. The good news is that the consultant would hopefully be current on what works and what doesn't, and be able to take a broad view of it. But I'd say at this point, we need to have our discussion on Monday with the selectmen and meet sometime in September to figure out where we are, where the town meeting is going to be.
Just one thing, you really do need to ask this of the whole Board of Selectmen for the personnel bylaw. There are implications in terms of powers that are vested in the administrator to reorganize. You now have moving parts. You have department heads that are part of a union, and there's potential when he reorganizes that he takes a position that had been an SEIU position and make that a direct report personnel bylaw position. If you make it more cumbersome, you gotta, the selectmen are gonna wind up giving an opinion on that, I know that.
Oh, well, they should.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely
Because it's more
should.
complicated than
Well,
just
yeah.
one report.
I understand that, but I mean, I think it
Right.
ought to be clarified. I mean, I think that whole procedure, I mean,
I know, but like I said, since that was actually developed, we now have union representation at the highest level of management. And so some high-level management are personnel bylaw positions, like water wastewater superintendent. And others are actual union members.
Well, more than even just being clarified, it should be accessible to the public,
well, yes.
which it has not been
Yeah.
ever, to my knowledge.
No, I mean, it's one great big mystery.
Yeah. So that would be the first thing, and then we can go on to the next, because I mean,
I
it
just
seems,
mentioned it because it's a big complex thing.
seems to me that this is a project that would take at minimum a year. Now, maybe it could be done in time to hold a fall town meeting in 2023.
My
Devoted-
indication from our meetings is that we're supportful of that.
Devoted
It wasn't
to-
being done to impose anything on you, it was to be able to give you help.
Right, but the impression I had from listening to that meeting was that they expected this to be done by the Maytown meeting. It absolutely can't happen. There's no way.
Climbing the Himalayas.
Unless somebody's got a complete template of everything that matches our town ready to, put on
I
paper,
don't
which,
think how you'd have a vendor in place to even start it until the beginning of the year.
well, that's what I'm thinking, because especially if you're pushing the town meeting off until October, optimistically, you get the money to do it, you have to put out a request for proposals, which is what, at least a month, 6 weeks?
Basically, to develop a work statement and put it
You
out
have
and
to,
get offers.
you have to review and, choose somebody. You have to negotiate the contract with somebody. It would be,
Sometime in 2023.
well, it would be amazing if it could happen
Realistically.
by the end of this calendar year. But it's a process before we even get started. So, and, simpler back in, 100 years ago, 30, 40, whenever it was a little simpler. We didn't quite have all these hoops to jump through in quite the same way, although we did have hoops. But we got to pick our own consultant, the Charter Commission. We didn't have to go through 16 steps. It was an independent elected body, and we were given a sum of money for a consultant. And we had a very fine consultant.
I was curious when I was looking this over, and this was just one of probably a million. This was just one that occurred to me. As part of this review, would it start to address topics like the minutes, the posting of minutes, now where almost everything is filmed, things like that?
That's covered under open meeting law. That's covered under
Okay,
open meeting
all
law.
right, yeah.
There's no, I don't think any need, or probably not even, well, I mean, you could tinker with it, but why would you?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, no,
You know,
that's all right.
but there are violations of that,
Yeah.
most posting of minutes all over the place.
I think it's just that I was thinking about where we're on we're behind the precipice of new technologies. There's so many things that, are affected by
Well,
it.
hopefully there will be some catch-up,
Yeah.
to get us into at least the 20th century and maybe even the 21st century. But I don't think we've quite finished the 20th yet, have we?
I wonder if the
There's an
state is
irony
taking
here
a
that
look
the
at this
Chronicle publishes
publication.
online.
Well, that's,
situation, you know?
the state should be taking look at a lot of
They
things.
should be.
The question of minutes, is, it's crossed my mind. Well, it's nice to have written minutes. Everything is archived in video.
That's true.
So, do you need minutes? Written minutes? Exactly.
Take our
I-
lawyer's opinion that all the minutes are is motion vote, then they would say yes. I take the archivist position that they're historic and that
Right.
you should be able to lift 20-year-old minutes and understand what happened and why.
Well, your lawyer
Right.
is actually correct.
I know it's
Certainly,
correct
certainly
legally.
video show, gives you those answers, but going
It-
back when, no.
When one is taught to do minutes, when one has classes of that sort, and of course of their education, one is told that it should be motions, actions, motions, actions, motions, action. I like a more complete narrative, but on the other hand, with all the technology, you really don't need it. I mean, you could practically run a transcript off the computer if you wanted to. Because I'm looking at your selectmen's meetings week after week. 8, 10, 12 pages. That's costing a fortune to do that, not to mention the fact that it's virtually written like a transcript in paragraph form, which makes it even harder to follow.
I am somewhat complicit in that, but I will say that there were times where, since they're not around anymore, I can say these things. But let's say when Superintendent Ferris was here, or and they wanted modular school buildings to put behind a building, and I would ask a question that wouldn't get in them, and it's like, are you going to lease these and then let them go? Or do you plan on making this a permanent addition to your structures? And you would get an answer. Or you'd ask the question specifically to hold somebody accountable, but you'd get an answer like, oh no, we just need them for the next 3 months. And then 3 years later, they're still sitting there and we're still paying a lease. There was some value to getting people on the record to say what their intentions were to
Well,
things.
the videotaping is a great blessing in that respect, because, you know, people have often been misquoted in newspaper.
People saying not going back to meetings, going back to 2008, there's no evidence, when there is video that shows that there is evidence.
Right, right. Yeah, it makes it very hard to
Exactly.
spin things. Anyway, enough of that. We need to pick a meeting date. Kids,
4 weeks is September 13th.
okay, that sounds good. Even if there is a town meeting, that would be a convenient time, wouldn't it?
September 13th.
September 13th. Yeah, it looks good.
Okay.
What about everybody else? And we may or may not have a new member by that time. 5 PM, same place.
What date?
We can count on it.
13th?
We haven't actually advertised
September
it.
13th?
Yes.
You haven't advertised it because I don't think you've had official word of it on your agenda yet.
That's the point. We
Yep.
need bully pulpit to be able to say, you know, these folks need somebody. I don't think there's anybody that's put a freestanding.
Well, we're fine, but it would be good to fill it because it's...
You're not going to have a new member for your next meeting, is what I'm trying to say.
No, I wouldn't think so, but you never know. Anyhow, anything else? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. It is 5:40.
Home and pray for rain.
It's there are raindrops going on behind me.
Oh, you can hear it?
Is that what those things
I
are?
don't hear it.
That's what I've been
Are you
told.
sure?
I'm positive. And for the next meeting, I think I'll wear pastel.
Okay, got it. I got the